The information expressed in the following podcast is intended for educational purposes only and was created by and belongs solely to Believe Limited and the Flow podcast and does not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsors. Please speak to your healthcare provider before making any medical decisions.
Hi, I'm Jessica, and welcome to Flow. I'm here like every month with Sarah Watson, sex therapist, and this month we have the authors of the Cycle book. They are ready to consult on how to track and why it's so important to track your flow. But first, we all want to know, how is it? How's your flow? Welcome once again to Flow. We start off Flow with a quick check-in to normalize the reality of menstruation. So right now, we're going to ask and answer that question we all love to know. How is your flow? And we do love to go first, but Laura, Morgan, authors of the Great Cycle book, would you be willing to share?
Laura, start us out.
I would love to. So I am in a new stage with my flow as I have gotten back on to the birth control pill after about 15 years. I am in a stage which my doctor referred to as a combination postpartum perimenopause overlap, a beautiful confluence of many symptoms.
What a Venn diagram.
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah. I also have PMDD. So I've been dealing with a cluster of symptoms, which I would not wish upon my worst enemy for a bit now. And so I am in a reacquainting myself with the birth control stage of my flow.
All right.
Okay, wow, what a wealth of knowledge of experience you must have to be coming back to hormone HRT sort of situations at a new era. We look forward to hearing more about that.
Yes. How about you, Morgan?
I am like minutes away from my bleeding phase. So that's always a fun spot to be in. I have endometriosis, which took me a long time to diagnose and have been managing for years, finding the best support. So I'm in the phase of eating a lot of red meat to manage my anemia that I get every cycle, as well as, wearing my other pants that I wear once a cycle that have a little bit more room in them. I finally got to the stage of life where I invested in some clothes that make me feel good instead of just trying to wear sweatpants once a month.
Yes.
And truthfully, I'm feeling really great about it all. I think I've got all those support systems set in place and the things that I know keep me steady, and excited to bleed at any moment now.
Do you think it'll happen while we're recording?
It could, especially we all vibe in. We're going to make it happen. That's great.
Let's get that period going. Let's get that flow happening. Oh, Jess, where are you?
Blood. The earth needs the blood. I am luteal, like always. No, I'm luteal.
It's kind of true.
Perpetually.
It's true. It's true.
Metaphorically and literally. No, I am luteal, and I will be. I'm like a week away. I'm cool. I started to feel some tender breasts, but then it goes away. It's like peeking its head out, being like,
Hi, maybe.
Yeah, I want to do this more. Like my lymph nodes want more attention around this time. That's where I'm at. How about you, Sarah?
Well, I just ovulated yesterday. Today's Tuesday. Yeah. So it's been really fun. And our listeners know that I have terrible ovulation symptoms. So I was feeling it earlier this week. But I started, to speak of that perimenopause, I started with a estrogen patch a couple weeks ago. So
Cool.
yeah, I'm kind of excited about it to see what happens.
Whoa.
So we'll report back on that one, but not sweaty in the last.
Okay, I was just going to ask, is there an initial impact from a week usage?
I mean, it's been, I think this will be the third week. I have to change the patch today. So, but I haven't been sweaty at night. So I'm kind of excited about it. Could be a fluke. Who knows? But we'll find out.
Well, that's why we like to keep track. We like to keep track of these things. It's very important to keep track. We're going to talk about the importance of tracking, charting, and why doing so offline is valuable. But first, we're going to hear from our sponsor.
This ad is brought to you by Von Vendi, Von Willebrand Factor Recombinant.
Hi, my name is Nicole. I didn't always feel empowered to speak up for myself or ask for the care and support I needed. Becoming part of a community and hearing other people's experiences helped to change my perspective. That's why my deciding factor is making my voice heard. To hear my story and access other helpful resources, drop by Von Vendi, that's VONVENDI.com/patient-stories.
And we are back. And now we're going to get into it. Oh, I have so many questions just from where we shared of where our flowing is, which has to do with like your background and how you came to be on this podcast today. Like, why talk about our flows? Why is it important to? But I would be remiss to not mention your amazing book that's come out, the Cycle book. What led to creating it?
Well, Morgan and I have been friends for a long time now. We met in our early 20s, and this was a long time before any of this was on our minds. And we went through a lot of stages together of getting to know ourselves and trying to figure our bodies out and trying to figure out how to be in relationships. And as we kind of found ourselves in our respective fields, we were still very close, and we found ourselves talking all of the time about these gaps in care that in midwifery and sex therapy were somehow the same, and people that we were seeing who were showing up and walking through our doors and feeling so disconnected from what was happening in their bodies and really not having a lot of information about what was going on. And lots to say here about some of the sex ed that we all grew up with or didn't.
Well,
but we realized that there was so much that people did not know about themselves. And as Morgan and I both mentioned in just a brief sort of statement about where we're at in our flow, we also were dealing with our own bodies and what was coming up for ourselves and feeling like we also wanted to know more. Morgan, does that sound right to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of it organically started with the, hanging out in our 20s, living the New York lifestyle and grabbing a glass of wine and talking about the craziness of being a person in the world. And inevitably, whatever was going on with our bodies would also start to come up, and it was of interest to us. So it was always a talking point. But then I think as we developed into our professional careers, it seemed organic to keep those conversations going and realizing that it was so much more fun to work with one of your best friends than to not. So we just kept doing it.
I love that. Can we back up and hear how you guys met?
Laura, do you even remember?
Morgan was friends with with two people that I met living in how to describe the illegally converted warehouse that we all lived in with a shared bathroom for many, many, many people. I met these two wonderful friends who became such an important part of my life in this shared bathroom. And Morgan was one of their friends, and we all connected. That is how we met. Although Morgan, I can't remember the exact place that we met. Morgan was this amazing artist and still is. And I was blown away by her and her passion and who she was. And I very much wanted into this friend group, these people that I had just met. And so I sort of forced my way in there.
Yeah, it was definitely all thanks to that horrifying warehouse that you lived in, and then all of the, lovely events we would go to in and around that space.
That's right.
Oh, the early days, right?
Yeah.
And then can we take a further step back and actually talk about your early menstrual education? Where were you? What kind of households or what was school's menstrual education, sex education like?
I like vividly remember my sex ed. I was lucky enough to have like some included in my education, including there was a group of people from Planned Parenthood that came to my 6th grade class, and classic future midwife, I remember being like 11 years old and thinking, God, those girls are cool. How do I end up being like them when I'm older? Um, and then as far as my household goes, I was raised by, progressive hippies that had pretty decent body awareness and gave me as much preparation as possible around it. And then still, I remember vividly the first day I got my period. I had full emotional hormone overload and like refused to tell my parents and just had like a meltdown by myself, even though it was supposed to be as smooth and easy as possible. I still experienced it very differently. So
Mm.
despite their best efforts and the education that I had, it still rocked my world in the beginning.
Wild. And I follow-up question, Morgan, though, did you have endometriosis symptoms from the beginning, or was that a
I
developed thing?
had those symptoms probably within 6 months. So not that first cycle. But I sure had a hormonal response emotionally. And I vividly remember the sensations in my body and then realizing I was bleeding and going, my God, this is what it's going to be like. And then, of course, didn't, talk to my mother about it, who was so lovely and so cool. She was like the cool mom that my friends in high school would go ask questions they were afraid to ask anyone else. I remember them asking her about like blowjobs, and she was like the cool mom that would be like, yeah, let's talk about it. And I still was like, God, I could not talk to my mother. Yeah.
I like
Wild.
it. Yes.
Wild and why. Wild and why. But wait, Laura, what was to balance our educational background, what was your early menstrual education like?
Yeah, my sort of school-based education was quite conservative in the area that I grew up. And so there were a lot of permission slips that had to be signed to participate in sex education. There was a heavily sort of pushed agenda is the word I want to use. I'm not sure that the school district I was in would use that word, but it was very abstinence focused as a safety precaution. It was sort of separated by gender. You would go with all the girls to get the girl information, and all the boys would get the boy information. And so there were just all of these layers of just sort of assumptions that you absorb at that age around why it has to be so protected. And some people aren't going to get that because their parents don't believe in this. And, you can't talk to boys about this. It has to be only in this like sequestered kind of like, really, really scary space that you get this information. My home life was different than that, which is great. My mother was in the medical field and really told us what our bodies did and used the anatomical words for the parts of our bodies. And we had a real respect for the body doing what the body is supposed to do, just sort of as a part of our family life, which I feel so grateful for, because I think it mitigated some of the shame that came with the school sex ed that I received. So it wasn't my only context for my body. And still, with all of that, I still didn't really understand for so long what ovulation was, what the cycle phases were, what these things mean for my body, what having something like PMDD actually means in terms of management and what I can expect and how to communicate that to other people. It really wasn't until I struggled with infertility that I confronted any of this, which still to this day is shocking to me. It really took something that really shook me and really forced me to look at things to actually get the education that I needed, and so far into my adulthood as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Wait. So and timeline wise, when was that in context of you going into sex therapy?
Yeah, great question. It was actually happening kind of simultaneously. When I was getting my certification, I was also at the same time struggling with secondary infertility. And there was a lot that was overlapping in a really interesting way, for sure.
I guess, and then backing up to PMDD, when did you learn
Mhm.
about what sort of support systems you could build for yourself? When was that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I consider myself very lucky because my mother recognized what was going on, and it
Oh,
was
wow.
an intervention of sorts
Okay.
from some people in my life. When I was around 18, and they said, "This is just not okay. Like, this isn't good for us. This isn't good for you. Something's going on." And my mom was able to facilitate the connection to the right type of medical professional who could assess me. And left to my own devices at that age, I do not have the confidence that I would have been able to get there myself.
Right.
And so I was able to get a diagnosis of PMDD properly at that age,
It's
given
amazing.
information about my treatment options, and had some success for a while with the treatment that I chose. And I tried a few different things, but I think the piece that still sort of stands out to me is that even in that, which to me is best case scenario, I still didn't really understand what was going on. I knew there was like a good part of the month and a bad part
Mhm.
of the month, but I didn't know that we're talking about ovulation. I didn't really understand what was happening hormonally. Nobody really told me those parts of it. And that to me is that sort of extra step, that extra layer that I think Morgan and I are really trying to solve for people through this book and through this project, is to make it accessible and useful and available before we're in this place of, but wait, what exactly is going on? What exactly does this mean? There's still
Mm.
just that like extra bit missing, which
Mhm.
again, even this best case scenario where I got the treatment and I got the diagnosis and I knew what it was, I still didn't have that extra bit.
Yeah.
Mm.
Amazing.
Yeah, right. Like, when was the first time you heard the word progesterone? Progesterone? Sorry, I say it right, but I heard estrogen at some point
Mhm.
in my development, but progesterone,
But that's it.
or I can't even say
Yeah.
it right because I never heard it. What? Um, dang,
Oh.
dang. So then the book itself, in the timeline of your experiences, when did that start to perk up as something that you needed to create together?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, years ago, Laura and I started formally working together. We each have our respective private practices, as Laura as a sex therapist, myself as a midwife. And we would so frequently have clients where, I would sit in a room and be like, God, there are these moments where I've capped my scope of care as a midwife, and I think who you really need to be talking to is a sex therapist. Or the reverse would happen with Laura. And so we were
Mhm.
able to collaborate with a few clients on that. And we started to build this like method of cycle tracking together. And I think, to speak to what Laura was saying earlier, some of the frustration for us was that we're always seeing these people in a moment of triaging or panicking or solving an issue. And we can often see in many of those scenarios that had a different kind of conversation happened earlier in someone's life, we wouldn't even need to be here right now.
Right.
And I think
Ooh.
that slowly started to build up over time, where that frustration for us as providers just peaked and was like, we've got to somehow share this with people in a bigger way than how we are right now, treating people one on one. And so the book just really quickly evolved from there.
Not to put you
Hmm.
on the spot, but do you have an example of like a piece of info that was missing that was so clearly just one that, yeah.
Do you have one, Laura? I've got a few.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm like,
which one? No, sure.
Ready
Yeah.
to go.
okay. I mean, I think we can stay with ovulation, Morgan, because this comes up in
Yeah.
both of our practices all of the time, right? Like,
Okay.
people have a
Yes.
general idea of what ovulation is, but they truly do not know how it affects them. And Morgan sees people all of the time who have been trying to get pregnant and have just like not had any idea when their actual ovulation occurs.
Mhm.
And Morgan has to sit with folks who walk through her doors and they've been trying for a long time. And Morgan has to say, okay, I'm not sure that you know when you've been ovulating. And this has been not really timing things accurately. All these times you thought you were trying, you actually weren't. And I'm sort of dealing with people who are coping with the grief of not knowing those parts of themselves and who have had missed opportunities because they thought they knew something about themselves, but they really, really didn't. And that I think can relate to people's understanding of their libido, people's understanding of how they connect in relationships, people's understanding of what happens if they're coping with any sort of mental health condition like anxiety or depression or OCD or PTSD or borderline personality disorder. All of these things that we know through research are impacted and exacerbated in this phase of the cycle, ovulation and after. There is just this gigantic gap, and that's just with ovulation, in how people know themselves and what their sort of behaviors are as a result of that. Morgan, does that, I kind of went off a little bit and moved it from fertility into all the rest of it, but
But I think that is kind of it. I mean, there's so much about, if you were lucky enough to have some form of sex education, it very likely emphasized that ovulation, if it has a timing, it's exactly 14 days into your cycle, and that gets kind of locked into your brain. But then the other thing that gets socialized through that is you could get pregnant at any moment. So be afraid. And that's just how, if you're taught about your body, that's how many, many people walk around in the world assuming their cycle works. And when people are trying to conceive, let's say, they are often surprised to find out that the 14-day thing isn't necessarily real, and the getting pregnant at any moment is most definitely not real, that it's actually this very tiny little window. And that's such a devastating thing to sit with people in a room when they're coming to me after a year or two of trying, and this has been on their timeline of life goals, to realize that, you know, that was within their power to have other information, but it wasn't provided to them. And now they've changed their entire life plan. You know, there's pieces of it that you're like, oh, thank God, you know, that's the only issue is timing. Well, we can fix that. That's so, so easy. But it's crushing when you wanted to do this 2 years ago and your fertility changes with time. And sometimes that gets trickier for people. I mean, that's I think the most obvious case of ovulation misunderstanding, which is not even misunderstanding. It's like, that's how we were told to understand it.
Right.
Where we really want to switch things up and have people understand that it's individualized, it happens different for everybody, and there are ways that you can sink in and get that connection to know when it's happening for you.
To your point, if people aren't looking to have a baby and therefore would like to engage in their sex life without the possibility of procreation, but they're afraid to, what that pressure puts on by the miseducation or the misinformation being disseminated. So how can the right information, the power of the real, how it works in this book, how can it help people to open the pages? How do people get that power? What's in the book? No, I know we have to get it ourselves, and like we can consult with you, we can get more intel, but like who is it here to help?
I think that's exactly it. It's easy to talk about fertility. It's easy to talk about the cycle in respect to ovulation and getting pregnant, but the reality is not everybody wants to get pregnant every single day of their life, and not everybody like needs to have that pregnancy focus or fertility. Some people have no desire for it at all, or are not in that phase, or never have, or don't have any sperm in their life, so it doesn't really affect them in that same way. And everything that Laura was listing before that we can learn through the hormonal shifts in the cycle, things like, you know, how your mental health is going, how your physical health is going, if you have forms of chronic illness, those things are all affected by hormones. So the more understanding we have about how our body communicates with us, the more we can listen to it and figure out how to support it. And I think that's where we're really trying to broaden the conversation about cycle tracking, get away from fertility. It is so much bigger than that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're hoping that this is an antidote to some of the sex ed that we all received, and is also preventative, that by having useful information about how our bodies work, we are able to, when something does come up, be able to act as advocates, be able to make better informed decisions, be able to already have such a foundational understanding of what's going on in our bodies that we can then engage with a moment of difficulty with a lot more support. So we're truly hoping that this book is useful for anyone who menstruates, and we've designed it to be really adjustable to whatever a person's needs may be. And what we want to suggest is that being able to be present with your body and listen to it and do some tracking as a result of it is something that we all can do. There are some barriers that we really want to validate. There are a lot of reasons why it can be hard to be in our bodies. And so part of what we're trying to do as well is show readers how to be in their bodies, even when it's hard, because it's a sort of, an ask that some people will be on the receiving end of from a doctor or a provider to, why don't you track your cycles for a few minutes and come back? And what that actually looks like in practice can be a little bit complicated for people. And so we've really made this simple. And we've also said, to be able to track, you kind of have to be in your body. And so here's also a way to be in your body. Like, here's how you listen to your body. Here's how you identify sensations in your body. Here are all of the sensations that you could be noticing in your body. And let's figure out a way to kind of track them a little bit and create a nice data set for yourself so that you can use that to take care of yourself.
And I have to say, like, as a person who's been a provider, who's been recommending cycle tracking for many, many years with clients, I see someone's face when, like, you've maybe seen cycle chart papers that exist in the world, and they can be a little bit overwhelming. I see what happens to somebody's face when I show them that paper and say, like, what if we just tracked these couple of things? And they look at me like, holy, what do you want me to do? Like, I'm going to be back at school. This entire thing that is so overwhelming when people may already be overwhelmed and trying to figure out what's happening or what brought them into the office. And I think that's where Laura and I really got together and we're like, this has to be accessible. This has to be easy. But not only that, it very clearly should be enjoyable, and there's a way to do it. And it just like wasn't existing for us for years. We were trying to offer people something that someone else had made or had existed, and we would always have to like preface it before sharing that piece of paper with them. Be like, put your feet on the ground, take a deep breath. I'm going to show you something crazy, but trust me. And we'd work ourselves into it and just realize, God, we've got to like rewrite what this whole thing looks like, because it can be enjoyable and empowering, not just homework.
Yeah. On the heels of that too, can either of you speak to the idea of pen and paper or marker, whatever you recommend, versus all of these apps that we have? And I'm sure that you all saw what I saw last week, and how I think it was Ovia was, and don't correct me if I'm wrong, we'll have to look that up, but was asking in the app, which is a tracking app, to then put where they live. So now we're not just tracking cycles, we are tracking your location. And obviously I have lots of thoughts, but I'd love to hear from both of you on what your thoughts are and why it's important to keep a paper copy of things.
Well, thank you so much for introducing that topic, because we really, really, really want this to be a safe option for people who are tracking, especially where we are seeing some increased surveillance and promises of increased surveillance in some parts of the United States right now. And so this is definitely a way to be able to keep some of that information from being digitally discoverable, essentially, and to keep it in that sort of like pen and paper space. The apps have a few parts of how they work that we really want to educate people about so that they can make some good choices for themselves. And in the same way that we talked about this, the ovulation not really being like exactly 14 days,
Right.
most apps are using a predictive algorithm to try to give people information about when they're going to ovulate. And that is just not really that accurate for many, many users. And
Right.
there is some research saying that a lot of the apps are less than 20% accurate at being able to predict that cycle phase, which is super important. And so, there's this piece of this where they're not really working in all the ways that they need to be working. And then this like extra layer and that they're really not safe. All of this information is discoverable, and we really want to encourage people to think about how they are communicating digitally about these pieces of their life and really thinking about what it's like to really take care of themselves. I mean, in all of these ways, right? Like take care of what's happening in your body, but also take care of your safety and take care of your digital security and
Your data.
your data.
Like your own data. Tracking your own data is so valuable is what I keep hearing in this convo. But I don't need other people tracking my data. That's for me to track, share in conversation with any providers that it's relevant to.
And that's it. And that's it.
And
no one else needs to know.
Yeah. None of that is protected, which I think is surprising for people. There is no data protection for what you are putting out there on an app, texting, your geographic location. None of that is protected as your personal health information.
And I can't tell you how common this scenario is where I meet with a client and they've been, trying to track their cycle for years and years and years using either some sort of device or their phone in a tracking system. And we bring up the conversation of cycle tracking and they show me this data in which we can clearly pinpoint within 5 minutes that the way that app has been telling them how their cycle works is just simply not accurate. And it's so devastating when people are intentionally taking years out of their life to gather this information and then it's being disseminated back to them inaccurately.
Right.
It's just crushing.
Morgan and I asked ourselves this question, like, why is it that we've been done so wrong? And that as a solution to this, like, really significant gap, what has happened is like all of these pink apps, which are like selling our data and like not giving us correct information are the only option. And the alternative to that is like, printing out a 20-page Excel spreadsheet and getting out your protractor and your compass and like, doing algebra to track your cycle. We, just were questioning some broader systems at play and feeling a little bit angry and really just being like, I think things can be better here. I think there must be another option.
Yeah, we love the menstrual rage. We talk about it often on almost every episode, right? But the same thing, like why? Why is this such a thing? I'm so happy that you guys have created this, but fuck, right?
I
like,
know.
Yeah.
I know.
Ugh.
And I think we also we took such great effort with this book that I'm really proud of in being able to recognize the systems that we live in are just not set up to support us. And, you can read the paper now and at least they're calling it out that none of the research is on menstruating bodies. So none of it applies to us. And we haven't been giving it its due diligence to even be offering recommendations of healthcare for menstruating bodies. But part of what we were really hoping to get across to people is not only can this book become a repository for your own health information, but there's also tool sets of how to navigate a healthcare system that is simply broken and not working for people. How do you actually live in the world that we live in today that has, dare I say, some misogynistic patriarchal systems at play in your healthcare and still be able to get what you need and be taken care of? And that's the reality of the world that we're living in today, is we still need to work within those systems at times and figure out how we can be okay.
Yes.
Impending autocracy, I think was what we,
Oh.
an impending autocracy is what we have. And
Mhm.
that's certainly influencing the healthcare
Yeah.
system.
What do you really, really like? If you're like, yes, that was my favorite thing to write. Like, is there any like a little nugget, little tip in there that you can both reach
Yes.
for? Okay.
We made this beautiful. We felt so just unseen by the way that menstruation is represented aesthetically in the world.
Yeah.
and so angry about it that we have worked with one of our friends who's an incredible artist, and she actually like put her writing in the book. Our friend, who is also an incredible artist, did some anatomical drawings for us. Morgan herself is an artist, and she put her like incredible eye to the page design and flow. And we really want this to be a beautiful, pleasurable experience that we are all deserving of. We want to like rewrite the story for what being able to engage with your cycle looks like. We want it to be aesthetic. We want it to be fun. We want it to be satisfying. The way the chart is designed, like you feel great. You're like filling in some bubbles, you know, you're like really creating a gorgeous pattern. Like it's gorgeous. And it is really exciting to be able to be like, hey, here's this like not hyper femme, not like flowery, butterfly filled version of what it's like to engage with our bodies. Not that there's anything wrong with butterflies. I love a butterfly, but
Oh, I can't.
Yeah, and it was so fun to like test it out with people because we've been working with our clients with these for years. So we have tried and true methods with this chart that it feels so great that it's like we no longer have to preface that piece of paper to people and say like, oh, don't be nervous, I'm going to show you something crazy. Instead, people are like, oh yeah, cool, I can do this. This feels great. And then they come back with their charts for us to look over together. And they're like, this was so fun. I love this. Like I like get it. I like it. It's an enjoyable experience. And it's just so sickly satisfying after so much frustration.
I can't wait to see this. I'm so excited.
Yeah, after so much frustration, enter the cycle book. I'm going to check it out for sure in our show notes. And can folks also check out how to get in touch with Laura, with you for sex therapy work and consultation, and Morgan with you for midwifery, as well as for consultations on the cycle book? Would that be all right? Great. Check out our show notes. Get all that intel. Know thyself. Seems like the most important power we can have in the impending autocracy. And we'll see you next month on Flow. Flow is produced by Bloodstream Media. Big shout out to our creative director, Amy Board, and our editor, Kay Vermeil. New episodes of Flow will be available the second Thursday of every month.
Hey, that's the day after I start menstruating.
And thanks to our sponsor, Takeda, for their support of Flow.